Hello and welcome back to Wyoming Watch, the Wyoming Tribune Eagle's weekly podcast. I'm Taylor Staples, your arts and entertainment and features reporter. This week, I spoke with author JoLynne J.J. Lyon on her new book, The Madres Deal. The book, which released on May 1st, revolves around a detective, Shae Barcola, who has a special power that makes everyone around her tell the truth. One day, a wealthy client discovers her ability and hires her to find his missing daughter. The book is set in Wyoming and Colorado, specifically in an area resembling Cheyenne, which is where Lyon grew up before moving many moons ago. Stick around after the interview to get a roundup of this week's upcoming events as well as what's been in the headlines this past week. Now, back to the show. I love to know about timelines for you, so kind of bring me back in the past when you first started writing this book, because at that point you probably knew you didn't want to do self-published. So what was kind of the timeline of this, and when did you find Cedar Fort and start working with them?
Okay, great questions. I have always wanted to write, so I used to be a reporter, and that was always the plan, was when I was done being a reporter, I would write books. And it just has been a very long and twisty path to get here. That book that I put out as a self-published novel was in 2014, so that tells you it's been a while. After that, there were a lot of family demands, and I just kind of had to drop out of things, not just because of time constraints, but also I was helping with caregiving. I wasn't a full-time caregiver, but I was helping a lot with that. And it takes so much of your focus, and that creative energy just kind of gets pulled in other ways. So I wasn't really able to get back to this. I remember actively working on this story through the pandemic. Cedar Fort recently reopened to fiction, and it was really intriguing to me to work with them on that. I know their audience, and I knew this story would work with their audience. And so it was pretty exciting to see them open up to that, and they've been really great. They've done a lot to help me out.
That just what you kind of said reminded me a lot of Shae is your main character, right? Kind of how she went on a long hiatus and reconnected with people. Yeah. Let's get into those themes of the book and what inspired you to start writing this and what inspired you to kind of form Shae into the character that she is.
So I hope I don't give you too much information here. But I had mentioned that I used to be a features reporter, and I had the experience more than once of sitting down in an interview and having people to tell me a lot more than they intended. I actually would have people call me the next day and say, please don't use this, whatever it was that I told you.
Totally.
And not everybody has that happen to them. But I think it's just something that happens when you're a sympathetic face and a good listener. And yeah, that would happen. And then after I was a reporter too, I would have people just confide in me a lot, like more than they intended. And I really want to communicate respect for people in their stories. It is so wonderful when people trust you, with that kind of information. So I don't mean to make it sound like there was anything magical about it.
Right.
In fiction, you can make it as magical as you want. So I gave Shae this ability where people would just kind of spontaneously confess to her. Super fun to write. Also, kind of thought-provoking. How would your life be if you had this ability and you can't turn it off? And what would it do to your relationships? What would it be like? What kind of job would you have? And what would life be like when you come home? So it was really kind of fun to play with those themes. And the way Shae dealt with it was just to pretty much close herself off from the world, except for she was a photographer, which, she could shoot from a certain distance and make all of her appointments online. And so all of that worked out for her. But then also her relationships were really suffering as well because of this ability that she had. So in addition to solving a mystery, Shae is kind of navigating this, okay, how do I come back into the world and deal with real people? Because her new gig as a detective kind of puts her back in contact with people again. And I do think that's a theme that a lot of women of my generation, a lot of us kind of dropped out to take care of kids or to take care of aging parents. And kind of felt like, there was this space in our lives that we were pretty much withdrawn, at least not as involved as we had been before. And so I think a lot of people can relate to that, okay, how do I get back into the world? How do I get back into a job if I haven't been in one for all these years?
Mm-hmm. I love that you took an experience you had and put it into Shae and put a supernatural kind of spin to it.
I always hesitate at like supernatural. I'm like, because putting myself in Shae's shoes, it's just this thing that happens. It's just her life. She can't change it, and she's given up trying to understand it, but it is part of her life, and that's just the way she thinks about it.
That's cool. I'm curious about choosing to make her a detective too, because I feel like having those kind of powers that she has makes it ideal for her to be in like a detective PI role, because she's such an asset. So does she start the book as a detective? Does she go into it knowing that she's going to use her powers at that job? Does she get like recruited because somebody knows her powers? How does that kind of work in the book?
She got quote unquote recruited because somebody figured it out, and has lived her life very carefully trying to make sure that people don't figure it out.
Yeah.
But somebody did. And so he pulls her in because he has a missing daughter and he's really worried about her. And he knows that Shae can help. But it is kind of there's the flip side to it. People, as a reporter, you probably know this, people sometimes regret what they tell you. And most people are just, nice and they regret what they told you. But if they're dangerous people, that could be a real problem.
How did you work that kind of stuff into the book where people would confess to Shae and then want to take it back? How did that make her investigation harder? How did it make it easier? And what was developing that like?
Again, she's just really careful. So she has learned to avoid a lot of situations that are scary. Clearly, it does come to a head at the end of the book, and I won't give any of that away. But probably the biggest consequence of this dynamic is in her own family, because she's on the brink of divorce when this starts. Her husband is grieving some losses. He doesn't really want to let anybody else out of his sight, and he knows that she has this ability, and he's really concerned for her about how much she's going to expose herself to danger. Her biggest consequence really is with her relationship with him. He's kind of controlling about it, and she is absolutely putting her foot down that she has to get out in the world even if it's dangerous. But yeah, that dynamic is definitely there. And he says in the book, I am tall and I know how to throw a punch, and that stops a lot of problems before they start. But you're a middle-aged woman, out with this. I hope I've answered your question.
No, you totally did. And I love that perspective too, not just what you talked about earlier about the caregiving part of it, but also that perspective of we can't just go around throwing punches everywhere. And I love that her empathy is her superpower in this, because I feel like that's a very feminine thing, is that a lot of women have empathy is a total superpower, and a lot of women are
Thank you for saying
more emotionally.
That. Yeah.
It totally is, and absolutely not that men cannot.
That's not to say there aren't women that would throw a punch to solve their problems. Yeah, she's not one of them though.
Can I ask about the challenges of writing this book, and kind of a secondary question to that, challenges of writing Shae's development specifically, and how you worked through those challenges?
The challenges of writing, first of all, were time. I also work, and so I had to shoehorn this into, those moments that I had that were free. And as I mentioned, also just having the mental space to do it I had to wait until some other things, the caregiving especially, was less demanding on my time. And then the mechanics of writing it, I can speak a little bit to that, because you're sending out queries, you're looking for agents or publishers or whatever, and you're really lucky if they even tell you why they said no. A lot of times it's just, no, this is not what I'm looking for. And so much of what you're doing, you have to kind of figure out on your own. I did join a writer's group and pass the manuscript around among friends. And I was getting some consistent feedback that made me realize this story has to be told just from Shae's point of view. So I was playing with multiple points of view. I was not writing in first person at first. And the deeper I got into it, the more I realized, no, this really does need to be told in Shae's voice. And that is a classic PI novel. I grew up watching Magnum PI and even Dragnet reruns, and I've read some other detective novels, and they just sound so in their heads. It's almost a melodramatic thing, but that was the voice that I needed for Shae, especially with her living such an isolated life. It took me a while to figure that out and find it, but I think once it did, it clicked.
And that's such a good point too, because I don't know if I've ever read a mystery novel that hasn't been in first person, because I feel like that's what captures the mystery almost, is you're with the detective. It's when you have all the other clues, it's possible that like you could figure it out before even the main character or detective figures it out. So it's fun to kind of go through that journey with them and get the clues as they get them too.
I will say, I don't know if you've read The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. That has an ensemble cast and it rocks. It is so, he's done this whole series and it is amazing, but it wouldn't work for what I was doing.
It is about like Shae's isolation too, and how she moves on from that too. So she is like the main character in this book, her, Kennedy, and the person who recruits her. Are there any other characters you had fun kind of playing around with in this book?
So there's a character, her name is Dana, and she is the wife of the first client that Shae has, the one that figured out her power. She doesn't come in until about halfway through the book, but she was super fun to write. She is everything Shae is not. She is confident, assertive, beautiful, rich. She's very much what would seem like living this idealized life. She's not, but at first glance she is. And she was really fun because she's such a foil character, I guess, for Shae. It's easy for them to be friends because she says what she thinks anyway, It's not that hard for her to do that. And so everything is just out of her mouth and she doesn't regret it. And Shae keeps so much of what she says to herself, or so much of what she thinks to herself. They were good foil characters. It was pretty fun.
And do you feel like kind of integrating those characters too helped with the development specifically for Shae to figure out this mystery?
Definitely Dana took a pretty strong role. There's a point in the book where Dana and her husband disagree on how this, what should be investigated, how it should be conducted, and Dana pretty much takes it over. Definitely she made the mystery progress and the plot progress. The clients were very involved in how the whole story rolled out.
This book being set in Cheyenne, how did you decide on that, and why is it set in Cheyenne? And tell me all about that.
I grew up in Cheyenne. Actually, I didn't deliberately write this into the book, but I think so much of the book is about accepting yourself and your circumstances and celebrating them rather than trying to hide them, right? Growing up in Cheyenne, when I was a high school student, I was embarrassed to be from Cheyenne. Honestly, I'm so sorry to say that out loud, and I'm not anymore. And so, all of the fun stuff was happening in Colorado. You had to go over the border if you were going to do anything fun or shop in a cool place. I just remember all of those things, and it was kind of a fun dynamic to play with. But also, it's been about 10 years ago now, my sister and I decided, okay, we're going to go back to southern Wyoming. And we started Googling pictures of southern Wyoming, and we were like, wow, Snowy Range and the Sierra Madre Mountains are beautiful. They are gorgeous. And we never even knew, we spent our growing up years and we just didn't know. And I think that, this whole hidden gem thing is just really fascinating to me. And I do feel, I still have relatives in Cheyenne. I still get there now and again. And I do feel like Cheyenne is doing a great job now of being an attractive place for people not just to grow up, but stay. When I was graduating from high school, most of my friends had no plan to stay. I feel like the city is growing up. I feel like people are learning to appreciate Cheyenne for what it is and stop worrying about what it's not.
That's so interesting that even you felt like that when you're young. A lot of people I talk to, even now who are in their 20s, feel the exact same way you did when you were growing up here.
And I was hoping it would be different.
Yeah.
I was hoping that Cheyenne would move past it. But, and I think some of it, too, is just being a teenager. Everything that's familiar is contemptible.
Yeah, I know. You just want something different. Exactly. Can I ask how the setting lended to this novel being a mystery specifically? Because Wyoming is underpopulated in terms of the least populated state in the country. So being a mystery, I feel like that's really interesting because the area is so desolate. So I was kind of wondering how you played around with that and how the setting contributed to the mystery.
First of all, I love the setting. I love the wide open spaces and the loneliness and there are so many themes that you can play with there. I live outside of Wyoming now, and everybody thinks that it's all I-80, or else Yellowstone. Those are the two things that they think of when they think of Wyoming, and that was part of the fun of writing this book was showing a different side, I think. One that is not super famous, but still beautiful. I have to be careful with that. I don't want to start a tourism run. I think there is so much about Wyoming that's underappreciated. And so, I really liked the setting. I don't know how much it did or didn't help with the mystery development part, but it did reflect a lot of, I still live in a pretty rural area, a pretty small town. And honestly, my life is driving. If you're going to do anything, you've got to drive a half hour to do it, at least. And that was Shae's experience writing the book, too. So I felt like, we were having that parallel experience.
I love that. Yeah. And also, I love that you talked about the isolating part of the state being so underpopulated and the area being relatively vacant, that it felt like a fitting place for Shae to be when she did feel isolated from that happening. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will clarify, Shae actually lives in a community that it's fictional, but it's kind of between Cheyenne and Laramie. I'm in Utah. I've also lived in Idaho. So we have lived here for more than 30 years. And yet I do go back to Wyoming, and every time I do, I'm like, oh, sagebrush. I didn't know how much weird thing, but I did miss it. Maybe not I-80 sagebrush, but the sagebrush that runs up to the foothills, and then, you see the aspen and the evergreens, and I just love being able to look at that and feel so at home when I'm there.
You and Shae have so many parallels in this book, because it kind of sounds like that's why you set this in Cheyenne, was to pay homage to you and the parallels between you and Shae and put her where you grew up.
The advice is often write what you know and branch out from there.
I feel like there could have been so many genres you could have taken that, coming of age and romance even. And what drew you exactly to make this a mystery?
I love the genre. I always have. I really love mystery but a very specific type of mystery. I have never been drawn to the violent aspects of a mystery. And I realized actually, I don't know exactly when, but I realized that the mysteries I was really drawn to were the ones that did kind of explore human nature rather than police procedural stuff. And I just felt like there weren't enough of those kinds of stories. I will say, in the years since I started, there are more of them, more stories like that. And I'm glad, I think there's still room for me.
What are you kind of thinking for future books, if there are any?
I'm halfway through the next one, so we will see. It's like everything else. You have to see if anyone picks it up or what happens after that. But I really hope to keep her going.
Now, let's get into some of the events this coming week. Today, June 5th, there's a Hell on Wheels rodeo and chuck wagon dinner with doors opening at 5 p.m. at the Event Center at Archer. Today is also the kickoff of Fridays on the Plaza this summer with Switchfoot as the headliner and Kevin McClure as the opener. These concerts start at 6 p.m. at the Cheyenne Depot Plaza stage. On Saturday, June 6th, the morning starts with the 18th Annual Pine Bluffs Community Garage Sale from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Maps are available online to see where to go for this. Then, the library is hosting a launch party for their new mobile library at 10 a.m. in their parking lot. Also, the Cheyenne Botanic Gardens has their High Plains Arboretum sale from 10 a.m. to noon, and the Cheyenne Frontier Days Old West Museum is hosting Family Days Aloha Vaqueros edition from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Black Dog also has their cornhole tournament and block party from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturday at Blue Raven. And there's a Summer on the Streets kickoff all throughout downtown from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Finally, there's a Cheyenne Youth Symphony concert from 2 to 4 p.m. at the Blue Athletic and Recreation Complex at LCCC, and a Come Spring Again poetry gathering at 7 p.m. at the library and the Cottonwood Room. On Sunday, June 7th, there's the 20th Annual Yiddish Food Festival from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Mount Sinai Synagogue. On Tuesday, June 9th, there's a Cheyenne Women's Connection meeting called Stop Horsing Around from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. at the Red Lion Inn, as well as a couple events at the library, including 2 Brushes and Bites painting classes from 1 to 3 p.m. and from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. There's also Family Bingo from 6 to 7 p.m. at the library. Then there's a Discover and Discuss session at the CFD Old West Museum from 5:30 to 7 p.m. on Mexican-American beatworkers, as well as a workshop called Collage Prints from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. at the Creativity Center. Also, the Lincoln is hosting a Lord Huron concert at 7 p.m. Then at sundown, the Cheyenne Children's Museum is hosting a movie night featuring Night at the Museum for members only. On Wednesday, June 10th, Craig Johnson has a book signing for the Brothers McKay at noon at Barnes & Noble. And the library has a couple events throughout the day, including a Library for All summer reading event from 12:30 to 2:30 p.m., a Ready, Set, Go Public Health Heroes event from 2 to 4 p.m., and a Queer Wyoming History Chat with Wyoming Equality from 6 to 7:30 p.m. Then at 7 p.m., Tim Meadows is headed to the Cheyenne Civic Center for Comedy That Cares. On Thursday, June 11th, the CFD Old West Museum has an opening reception for their Presidential Visits exhibit from 5 to 7 p.m., and the Wyoming State Archives has their evening speaker series session this week on Untold Western History from 7 to 8 p.m. There's also Community Bingo at 6 p.m. at Edgewood Aspen Wind. For the full list of events, go to wyomingnews.com/calendar. In the headlines this week, Governor Gordon signed an executive order addressing data centers in Wyoming on Wednesday, establishing a new regulatory framework, calling on the state to take more action. Next, police are still determining whether criminal charges are appropriate for a man who threw a burning book into the main entry area of the Laramie County Library on Monday morning. The man had seemingly bought a shake from the library's cafe, dumped it in a fashion that appeared to be deliberate, lit a personal copy of John Green's Paper Towns on fire, threw the burning book into the main entry area of the library, and pulled the fire alarm on his way out, causing an evacuation. Also, a $3.5 million private donation aimed at helping address Cheyenne's housing shortage moved one step closer to formal acceptance Monday after receiving support from most members of the Cheyenne City Council's Finance Committee. That's all for this week's episode of Wyoming Watch. Tune in next week for more local news.